Hello, my fellow knights and warriors. In 1983, 2 years after publishing of original Cry Havoc, there came a Siege, second game of the series, uh, designed by Alan E. Paul and illustrated by Peter Dennis, a famous artist when it comes to the military art. And the fun fact is that the game was advertised and announced even before authors started to work on it. So they had a very short time to make their game. Alan says, it took them 9 months of research, design, and even playtesting. And it is important to say that they had to make the game, which will be new and will be also fully compatible with original Cry Havoc. And it doesn't seem to be very easy job, because as you know, Cry Havoc is very simple game. That was the author's idea. And Siege, to introduce rules about conquering castles, needed to be a bit more complex. Also, there were 2 years between Cry Havoc and the Siege, and authors get some feedback, including some suggestions, ideas, and critique about original Cry Havoc, so they decided to include some of the updates to the rules. So, Siege was first standalone game, but also a game of the Cry Havoc series, so it could be used together all alone. You didn't have to to have original Cry Havoc to play Siege, but it was definitely good to have both of the games. Siege came with two new boards. One of them was the camp. That was a standard military camp placed on the hill with some tents and some trees on this hill, and it was pretty ordinary map, but had some nice, some interesting ideas due to the fortifications around this hill. But I think the even more interesting was a castle board. It was not a very big board, as you can say, but it introduced the whole new level of rules into the Cry Havoc family, because you finally get a siege of the castle. As probably some of you are aware, sieges were most common things during the medieval warfare than actual battles. Today we remember all these big battles fought in these days, like, well, say, Battle of Bannockburn, the Battle of Hastings, Battle of Azincourt, Battle of Grunwald, Battle of Kosovo, Battle of Kulikovo, Battle of Hattin, and so on and so on. But we have to understand that such major skirmishes weren't very popular, well, because it was hard to gather such a big army, to keep it, to feed it, to pay it, and then every battle was incredibly bloody and costly. So it was more popular to simply gather your men, close yourself in the castle, and say to the other side, "Come on, try to get me out." That's why sieges were so popular and happened much often than huge battles. So, Siege introduced such castle to the game. It was not some random castle, but it was based on the Scanford Castle in Wales. Here you can see what remains of this castle today and compare this castle with actual board. So that's how it looked, and that was not everything new. We get a new counter sheet, and you can already tell that this is pretty interesting, because this counter sheet is not going to introduce a lot of new characters. That's why holding original Cry Havoc is very handy here. But there was a lot of stuff that was used during the siege, like siege machines, rams, ladders, etc., etc., and even some new animals like ox, or draft horse, barrels of oil. All this stuff was used in the sieges, so it makes sense to introduce it instead of more characters. If player already had Cry Havoc, he had enough of characters. As you can see, Siege still used these reduced factors, like for example 8 movement points for mounted characters, 6 movement points for non-armored characters, etc, etc. And then you can see something new here. These were panic rules counters that were introduced in this game along with some new rules. Finally, we get a siege record sheet, which was used for the sieges, because as you know, it was not like we are approaching the castle and hurry on, huzzah, we are storming the castle. No, sieges often took weeks, months. So, to simulate such a long siege, we get a siege record sheet with days on. So it was again a new concept for the Cry Havoc family. Finally, new rulebook. A new rulebook that was quite a revolution for the Cry Havoc family, because it was normally made. By normally I say it was divided into chapters, paragraphs and sections, something that you won't find in the original Cry Havoc rulebook. Next, it was separated. It was divided into a couple of sections, and each section was designed in the way that you could finish reading it and play one of the scenarios that was about to use only the rules from this section. A very good idea that was later used in the Norman Saga games as well. A game came with a couple of new rules in both ways. First, it get a small update for the original Cry Havoc rules. For example, there came advance after combat, something that wasn't used in original Cry Havoc and brought a lot of confusion in the game. For example, someone was defending the doorway, you managed to force him to retreat, but you couldn't occupy his hex, so in his next movement phase he could simply get this doorway back. That was annoying. And here it was changed, along with missile rules. Missile rules get the new tables, and it was also quite a new stuff and new thing for the Cry Havoc. Next, we get a whole bunch of new rules that were dedicated to siege, like siege equipment and etc, etc. And finally, we get some new rules like panic that were about to simulate the whole chaos that might happen on the battlefield, and some elements of morale that weren't present in the original Cry Havoc family, original Cry Havoc game. So, as you can see, despite the fact that Alan wanted to keep the original simplicity of Cry Havoc in the siege, then siege was a major step forward, making a game bit more complex and bit more interesting. Of course, siege brought a couple of counters, and among them were well-known units like knights, squares, crossbowmen, peasants, bills, etc. But there were also new types of warriors. We get a longbowman. Finally, these archers armed with longbows that are definitely better than a shortbow. They have higher range and they are more deadly. Next, we get engineers, a completely new unit which is particularly useful during the siege. And of course a lot of siege weapons. You can see a couple of them here, and notice that it was the first time when Cry Havoc's family introduced these big 3 hex long counters. It is interesting, but because I think only a few of the war games really made such big counters. Usually, two hex size counters were big, and they weren't very popular. There aren't many games that used two hex big counters, but Siege introduced even three hex counters that are among the biggest counters used in the hex-based war games. Finally, we get 5 scenarios that were different when it comes to the complication and complexity. Some of them could be used right at the beginning of the game after reading only the first section of rules, but each section provided more rules and you could play a game on the different level. Of course, with a castle there came a lot of new terrain types and finally a new levels of the high, because as you remember from the Cry Havoc, in the Cry Havoc we had only clear terrain and there was a hill, so there were only two types of high, but this game brought towers, city walls, ladders, stairways, so again it was something that made Cry Havoc family a bit more interested. And remember that a lot of these things were later used in the both Cry Havoc games and Norman Saga as well. Since Norman Saga started with siege rules from the beginning, so a lot of these things that were used here were introduced later, of course in this bit updated form, but basics are the same.